Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for being with us today in a new webinar from Collect World Languages in collaboration with FFLA. We're really happy and pleased to have you here. As I mentioned before, this webinar is in collaboration with FFLA. We're very happy to have this collaboration and having been doing all these webinars. And just so you know, even though this is based on the Florida standards, of course, anyone is welcome on these webinars. But if you are from Florida and you would like to know more about Collect World Languages commitment and how we align with the Florida standards, I'm going to put in here also on our webpage where you can see all the correlations and all the information about Florida. And before we actually begin with the webinar, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Grace Kellermeyer, who's going to give us a few words. The microphone is yours.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate our partnership with Collect World Languages. I've got my conference cup here for this special occasion. In the morning, it's coffee. In the afternoon, it's wine. Anyway, so we want to welcome everybody to the webinar. We appreciate the partnership. We want to invite everyone to come to Florida, to beautiful Kissimmee, which is next to Orlando. It's accessible to Disney and Universal Parks. We'll be having the 2022 ACTFL Teacher of the Year, Heather Switzer, who is an Arabic professor in New Mexico. She'll be our keynote. We've got over 80 60-minute sessions in Spanish, French, Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, ASL, Latin languages. We also have a a defense language. I see DL and I think dual languages. Defense language track from the Defense Language Institute, which is a commonality that my husband and Linda Villadoniga have, that they both, one attended and one taught there years ago. And we have technology, AI, equity and social justice, games and engagement for instruction. We expect a beautiful conference. September in Florida is quite pleasant. And so we welcome everybody to please go to ffla.us to get more information and to get registered. Enjoy the webinar today. Thank you.
And welcome to everybody. I saw somebody asked if this was just for Spanish. And while I am formally a Spanish teacher, it is not just for Spanish teachers. The standards and benchmarks that we will talk about are for all world languages in Florida. So welcome aboard. Okay, so we're going to start by asking a couple of questions. And Sabrina, can they write answers at some point when we get there? Yes, they can, right? Okay. So first of all, what is Florida Standard number 7? What strategies can we use to teach this standard? How can we maximize the students' understanding of this standard? What is Florida Standard number 8? What strategies can we use to teach this standard? And how can we maximize the students' understanding of this standard? So 7 and 8 go hand in hand because they are connections and comparisons. So that's what we want to stress today. This is our first question, and we're looking for you to use the chat feature and give us your answers to the question, what disciplines do you connect to the study of a world language? What are you doing in your classroom now to connect to other disciplines?
Yes, now you can use the chat feature as Linda mentioned, and we're going to read. So we have politics and history of several Spanish-speaking countries, for example. Also art, culture, neuroscience, intercultural communication, history and current events, geography, history again, social studies, grammar, literature and culture, math, religion, sciences, music and geography. Not enough, but some art, history, geography, science, literature, music, social studies and math, many things. This is interest. This person has a visual encyclopedia set in Spanish. And with that, yes, and with that, we've gone over things like Sabbath, Ramadan, renewable energy, history of cell phones, etc.
Wonderful. The one thing I didn't see mentioned there is food. I see pop culture, which is, yes. But no one mentioned food. And while that's not a discipline necessarily in most high schools, it can be in some high schools that have a culinary program, or in, especially when, or not especially when, separate sentence. If you have students from other cultures, even if, or students from many Spanish speaking countries, it's a wonderful way to ease into the culture because every student loves food. That was the favorite day for my students. When I said we're having a food day, that was their very favorite activity. Of course, it was tempered a little bit when I told them that they couldn't go to Taco Bell, for example, to supply Mexican food. But other than that, there we go. Food places to visit. There we go. Good. Okay. So I'm glad to see that so many of you use Spanish to connect to other disciplines. The social studies aspect, the history, the art, the music, those are all very, very important to show the students that there are connections and with other things, that this is not something that's stagnant and just used in by itself, that we connect. Every time we speak a language, we connect somehow with another culture. If you are lucky enough to have students of other cultures, then this is a great way for them to connect to Spanish as well and not feel like they're being left out. I've given this example before, and I'm going to give it again. The last few years that I taught, I was in the northwest part of the county, and there were many different cultures represented there. We had Colombians, we had Venezuelans, and I know those are Hispanic, and I'm getting to it. But we also had a lot of people from India, from Pakistan, from at the end there, we had a couple of people from the Eastern Europe as well. So every chance I got to make a connection with them or to make a comparison with those students so that they would feel part of the class, I did. And that's something that we should be conscious of and certainly try to incorporate them so that they are not feeling like the odd man out. Okay, next slide, please. How do you help your students make connections with other disciplines using the target language? What do you do to make those connections? We had a wonderful list. Now, how do you incorporate that?
Okay, we have our first answers: music, readings, images as well. Go to and engage with Spanish-speaking communities. A food festival, speaking about food. Math when talking about time. Music videos, cultural readings, holiday celebrations. Drawing and painting if we go again with art. Research projects, videos with closed captions. History, movies, projects, skits, cultural activities, current events, real life situations, articles, readings, music. On religion, visit a church when they preach in their target language. Finding things we all have in common. Realia, which I'm curious about that. Stories. For example, we talk about how the French language was spread through other countries through colonialism using maps and social studies. Very interesting. Field trips, and these are some of the many answers we have.
Well, that's wonderful. That's a very good spread of ideas. And there are so many, many more that you can use. Use the sources that you have within your school and within your community to also do that. If you can bring in guest speakers from another country, that would be awesome. But I loved seeing all these answers. That was fabulous. Okay, next slide, please. What interdisciplinary connections can you or should you and the students make? And we're taking it now one step further.
Okay, so we have our first answer. We talk about how music contributes to the community and culture. Identify elements within lyrics and bring them into the lesson as references for a comparative approach to culture in class. Very good. ones that review classes they're already taken, ones that reinforce a class they're currently in or will be in next year, as well as connections to their future work and or life goals. Also work with international business class in the past, culinary and art students to incorporate Spanish within their curricula. Science, planets and the days of the week, using history skills such as cause and effect in a TL history lesson, comparing schools in the US and Spain, for example. Let's see. For example, math, cost of things in other countries, using currency converters, find similarities and difference, reading strategies, comparing their own culture and lives to those of the countries, and we're getting a lot more interesting
Yes,
ideas. I don't know if you
yes.
want to read a few more or if this is okay.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let me ask another question that isn't here, and this is just basically a show of hands. How many of you have worked with an art or music teacher to plan an event, maybe a school event or a community event? That's really what I meant by interdisciplinary in this question. If you have a good rapport with your art teachers and your music teachers and math teachers, you can find out what they're studying and try to include that somehow, or your social studies teachers or geography teachers. Try to include another group of or another discipline into working together so that it is truly interdisciplinary. I had a really good relationship with the music teacher, with the band director. He was right across the hall from me. And when I first moved to that classroom, I thought, yeah, all I'm going to do is hear music all day long. Well, I did, but I turned it to make it something really positive. So in doing that, I incorporated, or he incorporated, some Spanish music, Hispanic music, I should say, into his repertoire. And the students enjoyed that because Spanish was the principal world language that we taught at the school that I was last at. So he incorporated some Hispanic music into his repertoire. It wasn't necessarily for anybody's for an event or anything, but he found a way to incorporate it so that the kids would feel like it was truly an interdisciplinary connection. I had another teacher at the first high school I taught in St. Augustine. We would do projects together. So we would assign a topic, broad topic. She taught social studies. And they would have to do a paper, an essay on a topic. And then we would use that to do something in Spanish with that. So there are ways that you can work with teachers, especially if you have a program like the ACE program or the Cambridge program or AP, where you can connect with other teachers who teach the other part of that, and make it real for the kids so that they can see that things do cross lines and that it's very useful for them to do. There you go. Yes, immigration. Okay, let's go on to the next one, please. Okay, so Florida standard number 7 is connections. Students will be able to acquire, reinforce, and further his or her knowledge of other disciplines through the target language. ACTFL has a second standard for number 7, or an AB, and it is acquiring information in diverse perspectives, which all kind of ties in together. Again, we focus on Florida standards because I live in Florida, but when we wrote the standards back in 2011 and they were approved in 2012, we used the ACTFL standards as our guide. So if you follow ACTFL standards, then these are certainly the standards we're going to show you for Spanish or for world languages will carry over for you. Next, please. Okay, here's some ideas that I got from a book. I'm going to show you the book so that you can see it. I have it right here. This book. Oh, you can't see it, can you? It is the ACTFL World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. It has so many good ideas, and some of them are these. Learners use mathematics skills to convert weights and measures from the American system to the metric system. If they travel anywhere outside of the United States and maybe one or two other countries, they're going to need to know the metric system. I just came back from Cuba a couple of weeks ago, and I traveled with a girlfriend of mine who had to convert things because she is very American, and so when we traveled and it would say 240 kilometers, she'd say, how far is that? And I go, well, basically divide by half. And it's a little over, but whatever, it's close. So that's something that you can do. You can have an activity where they have to convert that. And you can talk to the math teacher and see if they can give you a copy of when they teach the metric system. Learners use their knowledge from health and science classes to compare healthy eating recommendations using food pyramids or the equivalent from different countries. Almost every country has a food pyramid these days. So that's a good way to connect with other countries. Learners use skills from social studies and English language arts to present short biographical sketches of people from the past and present who have had a positive influence locally or globally. In October, or September 15th to October 15th during Hispanic Heritage Month, this is a great activity to use with an English teacher, probably ninth grade. At the high school level, probably be a ninth grade activity where they could write an essay in English for the English teacher about a Hispanic who has made a positive contribution to society. That would be combining the two. Because the kids don't realize, I think, many times, that what they learn in a language arts class is carried over when they start writing in Spanish. Not everything is exactly the same, but certainly that is something. Military time, yes. Train schedules, plane schedules are all, in every Hispanic country that I've traveled, are mostly given in military time. So they have to know how to maneuver that. So that was a good one. Thank you. Next, please. Intermediate range progress indicators. So novice is the beginners. Now we're in the intermediate range. Learners use technology to present examples of contemporary culture. That's a multimedia presentation, for example. They can use music, compare music from one country to another. Are there similarities? What are the differences? And we all know, the top, the most known dances, salsa, bachata, cumbia, flamenco, tango, for example. I think most people know those, but there's so many more, and regional dances that they may not know about. So that would be a wonderful thing to talk about. Art. Have you ever thought about having a museum walk where kids take an artist from one of the Hispanic countries or from the French-speaking countries or German-speaking countries and study the art forms that artist has used, and then recreate something using the same style, and then put it around the room or in the hallways or whatever, and have a museum walk. Invite your other language classes to come in. Heck, you can invite the art classes to come in. You can invite parents to come in. And what a wonderful way to showcase your class using art. Same thing with architecture. We have all kinds of architecture in all of these countries. Some are very pronounced, like Gothic or Roman, Baroque, or something like that. But you can find examples in different countries, and that's part of art as well. Learners research and report on contributions of the cultures that use the target language to science and medicine. They can find people from the countries where the language you are teaching, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. You can have them research people who have contributed to science or to medicine that are from countries where the language you're teaching are from the country where oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so tongue-tied. But I think you get the point. Pick a country and find somebody who contributed to science or medicine or, anything, computer science, space exploration, whatever. And you will find people. And then that ties it into science, and that makes it a whole nother facet to language learning. Next. Advanced range progress indicators. Write a critical analysis of a movie, painting, literary piece from a country where the target language is spoken. Again, this ties into language arts, probably. Also, if your school has a drama program, or gosh, even I don't know, a news program, where wouldn't it be cool? This has just popped into my head. Wouldn't it be cool if your school has a large population of Spanish speakers, say, wouldn't it be cool to do the news one day a week in Spanish? The school news in Spanish one day, or in French, or in German, or ASL. I mean, what a cool way to expose the language that you're teaching to the rest of the school, and maybe get them hooked to take your class, to take another language class. That would be awesome. Learners use their knowledge of different forms of government. I think somebody mentioned that. And yes, that is a great way for them to realize and to compare. And I know we're going to go into comparisons later, but to compare the systems of government from one country to another. They may all be, not all, but a great number of them are democracies, and I'm putting that in quotes. But the form of democracy is different. Spain has a coalition government by and large because they have so many parties, and you have to have X number of seats in parliament to be able to select the prime minister. So that's something that we don't do here, but it's something that they do there. And it came out of a dictatorship, 50 years ago. So that's something to talk about. What about Puerto Rico, for example? That is a territory of the United States. How is their government, their island government, different from ours? Or is it? It's a great way to incorporate geography and history and social studies by doing things like this. Next, please. So, examples of interdisciplinary connections, and I'm not going to read them to you because I think we covered most of them, but there's one here, genealogy. What a cool way to see where people come from, and to show, and this is not a political statement, but it's a true statement that none of us, or a few of us, are indigenous to North America. Somewhere along the line, we all came from somewhere else, unless we have Native American genes. And that's one way of maybe crossing that line about immigrants and where they came from and why they came to this country. Film, if you have a film club, or the drama class, or TV production, maybe you can find a film that those classes can also discuss, and maybe it's from different viewpoints, and that would be a cool thing to do. Next, please. So what strategies can you use to maximize the students making interdisciplinary connections with the target language and other cultures at various levels? These are just some, it's by no means a complete list, but these are the things that are easiest maybe to grab onto at first, and then you will find that there are so many other ways to make those connections. Identify keywords and phrases in target language and students' native language. There are so many words that come from Latin and Greek roots that students may not realize. I mean, I know they teach Latin and Greek roots in school. That I can't remember what grade, but my grandson just did it, I think, in 5th or 6th grade. He had some words that were Greek and Roman derivatives. Well, you know, a lot of our languages come from Latin roots. So there's a lot of comparison there. Get them to see that autoservicio in Espanol is the same as self-service in English, because auto means self. If they know the prefix, then they can, it opens a wealth of information for them when they're taking, like, I don't know if they still do this, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago I took my SATs, but the vocabulary part was easy for me because I could make that connection with Spanish. If I saw a word that I didn't know, I always pronounced it in my head. I always pronounced it in Spanish, because that often gave me an edge. So that's, another little hint for them. Use maps, graphs, and other graphic organizers to facilitate comprehension of key vocabulary. I'm a great user of graphic organizers. And if any of you have been to any of the presentations I've made at any conference, I've done several sessions in using graphic organizers because I'm a firm believer in them. It helps the student visualize, and we have a lot of visual learners among us these days. I volunteer at an elementary school now that I'm retired. I volunteered in an elementary school, and when we're reading a story, I almost always pull a graphic organizer out of my bag and share it with them because I work with the kids who need the extra help. So I use that time to use graphic organizers so that they can see the relationships. Maps, they always love what I call, let's take a field trip. There is a big world map on one wall of the area where I work with the kids. So every opportunity I get, depending on the story, of course, we take a field trip, and they love it because they get to get up for a minute, walk over to the map, and I point to where we are and wherever the story takes place. And they can see the relationship between the distances. And then they ask the question, well, how did blah, 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 blah? How did so-and-so get to the United States? What made him come or something? It opens up, and these are third graders, but it opens up a conversation. Use expanded vocabulary and structures in the target language to increase content area knowledge. Never be afraid to introduce more vocabulary. Not a lot. Keep it to a minimum. Keep it to maybe words that they see the connection between one language and another, because that certainly will be a connection they've made, and then they can take it further if they are so interested. You'd be surprised what, or not. I mean, many of you are very much a veteran teacher like I am, but they make connections on their own once we open the door for them. And I was always very excited when a student would raise his hand and say, you know, Ms. V, I remember seeing that in world geography in 7th grade. And they would go on and talk about it. And what a good feeling that you've opened a door for them, that they've made a connection. Somehow they've made a connection. Sometimes they're tenuous at best, but if they've made a connection, you've taken a huge leap in that child's life. That's amazing that they can do that. The more connections they have, the more involved they will be with the language they're learning. Use previously acquired vocabulary to discuss familiar topics in other subject areas. And I'm not going to read that whole list. But once you've taught a few words that have to do with another discipline, don't forget to recycle those and keep them fresh in the student's mind. You're not going to test them on it. That's not vocabulary necessarily that's in your lesson. But if the opportunity presents itself 2 weeks down the road, by all means, take it. I mean, if you're showing a picture of a city, for example, and there's a cathedral in the Gothic style, could you not ask, ¿qué arquitectura se usó en esta iglesia o en esta catedral o lo que sea, en este palacio? Sure, you could. And if does it matter whether they say Gothic or Gotica? No, they've made that connection, and you've helped them make that connection. And that will carry over for them. This is what makes language interesting to the student. Nothing is more boring, even though I'm a grammarian at heart, but nothing is more boring than teaching grammar all day long. For me, it was always fun, but I'm quirky that way. So what can I say? But this is really, 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 if you can make connections with your students, they will come back and thank you later, because these connections are lifelong. And isn't that what we want? We want lifelong learners and connection makers. My gosh, if the world had more connections, wow. Anyway, next slide, please. Okay, so now we go into comparisons, and I've shown you or I've given you some ideas, but this is very specifically cultural comparisons. The student will be able to develop insight into the nature of the target language and culture by comparing their own language or languages and culture to other languages and cultures. And 2 actual standards. One is language comparisons and one is cultural comparisons. So language comparisons are harder for the students to make and to connect with, because I'm not so sure that Some students come with a knowledge of the parts of speech when they hit your class. And I'm not preaching that you need to teach them the parts of speech necessarily, but they do have to know the difference between a subject and a verb. So important when you're speaking, when you're writing, when you're listening, when you're, whatever it is you're doing. And I'm not sure that they grasp that as fully as they could. So you wind up teaching English grammar along with whatever other language you're teaching. Cultural comparison is much easier because it's something they can touch and feel and experience. But there's always that kid who loves the grammar. So, and the way that the language is set up. Because how many times have you heard, for example, Spanish is backwards? And I'd say to them, well, maybe it's the other way around, but we'll get through this. Next, please. Okay, so novice, we're going to start with the novice range again. Learners cite and use examples of words that are similar in the language that they are learning and their native language. I used autoservicio, autógrafo. Well, selfie now is like worldwide. There's like, who doesn't use selfie? But that's part of this too. And new words that come into the language. We're melding cultures more and more. Learners identify cognates between the target language and their native language, false cognates and real cognates. If they form a false cognate, please be sure to correct that because they could wind up, I won't say in trouble, but maybe embarrassed a little bit if they use the wrong cognate or the wrong word thinking it's a cognate. Embarazada, for example, comes to mind. They think it's embarrassed and definitely not. Learners can identify idiomatic phrases in the target language and in their own native language. Idiomatic phrases are so much fun. I had like a phrase of the week or a saying of the week or an adage of the week, and we would talk about it. And I always chose like the ones that were far out there. Like, I started out with something like no le mires, ¿cómo es? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. No le mires los dientes al caballo or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it is in Spanish. But it was fun for them to work their way through it in Spanish and come up with the English. Now, some expressions, they have no idea what that means in English, let alone in another language. I would say to them sometimes when they had these extraneous comments, would say, and tell me, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? And they'd look at me and they go, why are we talking about China? I go, that's, it's an idiom. It's a phrase. Do you not know what that means? And then you have to go into the whole thing. So, but they're learning. And then the next time I said it, they would remember what it meant. Okay, next, please. Intermediate, learners match groups of people. Oh, a caballo regalado no se le ven los dientes. Muchas gracias, Jorge. Muchas gracias. Sí. Intermediate range progress indicators for language comparisons. Learners match groups of people with ways of expressing respect and communicating status differences in their own language and the language they are learning. There's nothing I hate more, honest to God, there's nothing I hate more, well, maybe a few things, to be called dude. Nothing. Or bro. I'm neither a bro nor am I a dude. And those are cultural differences that you can use that amongst friends, but there's a level of respect that I'm not sure the kids today get. Or hey, yes, hey is another one. Oh my God, yeah. So they have to know that there's a level of respect in there. And I know that, I travel mostly to Spain because that's where my family's from, but I was amazed several years ago. I don't even know how many years ago, when the first time I went, I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I remember everybody using usted with their parents and with their grandparents, of course. And fast forward another 10 years, and all of a sudden it was tú, 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 tú. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. We've crossed the line here. Excuse me. And now I have many friends who are teachers in Spain, and the students used to with them. So the cultural barriers, if you want to call it that, have changed as far as respect. Respect is something that is shown. It doesn't have to be said, if that makes sense. Just because a student refers to you as tú does not mean he or she doesn't respect you. It's just the jargon of the day. Generation gap. Yeah, definitely a generational gap. Definitely, definitely. And generations change. Absolutely. I mean, my grandsons and granddaughters use words that I, I look at them and go, yeah, what does that mean? But, they're 10, 11, 10, and 5. So they have a whole set of vocabulary. Let's see, where am I? Learners match groups of people with ways of, I said that. Learners compare how different time frames are expressed in the target language. If you said to a student, for example, I went to the store yesterday, they can tell you that's past tense, or they should be able to tell you that's past tense. Then you get into Spanish where it said, yo iba a la tienda todos los días, or yo fui a la tienda ayer. And you're asking for that not subtle difference, because for us, it's not a subtle difference, but you're looking for that shade of difference in what's being said. And that's very hard for them, even though there is a way of expressing that in English. I used to go to the store every day, meaning you don't go anymore. So if you explain that to them, they won't get it at first because they don't see the difference necessarily. But if you keep saying it to them, then they will soon see the difference. Subjunctive is another one, which is not a time frame, but subjunctive is so ill used in American English. If I was rich, no. If I were rich, why? Because blah, 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 blah. And you go into the description. But they don't get it because they're not taught it in school. They're not taught subjunctive in school. I wonder how many new young English teachers actually know what the subjunctive is in English. The older ones do, I'm sure, but the younger ones, I'm not so sure. Shades of meaning expressed by such differences like the imperfect and the preterite. The future and the conditional can sometimes get mixed up with kids. So you can use examples from English. You can use examples from other languages. If you are lucky enough to have students from other cultures, that would be a wonderful thing, because a lot of languages have those subtle differences. And if they know it in their culture, then it's an easier transition for Spanish. Next, please. Advanced range. Okay, learners analyze. Now we're getting into the, we're going deep. Analyze elements of the target language, such as time and tense, comparable linguistic elements in English. Learners recognize that cognates have the same as well as different meanings among languages. So a word that is used in Puerto Rico may not be the word that's used in Colombia. A word that's used, like bicho for me, is insect. That's a bug, an insect. But I can't say that word in Puerto Rico because it has a totally different meaning, which I was unaware of until my son married a Puerto Rican girl. So there you go. I learned something. Next, please. Okay, cultural comparisons. Those were linguistic. Now we're going into cultural. And I know I mixed, but bear with me. Learners compare games, stories, songs, and rhymes from their childhood to those in the target language. Jump rope is, probably a worldwide game that children play. Some of the rhymes may exist in another language, may not exist in the target language. But it's okay to talk about those things so that they start to see a comparison. And sometimes they will call a game something that you don't know, that didn't come out the right way. You may not associate whatever they call it with that game. But if they've made the connection, that's That's awesome. Learners compare celebrations, birthdays, holidays. When you're talking about la quinceañera, there is a comparison you can make in other languages. In the United States, there was a time when, and probably still is among a certain level of society, where there are debutante balls. That's like quinceañera for us. Another one would be how we celebrate birthdays in the US as opposed to other countries. In many of our countries, the Saints' Day is more important than the birthday. Maybe not more important, but it is also celebrated because that's part of the culture, the religious aspect of our culture. We celebrate San Juan, San Jose, Santiago. I mean, there's so many. But that's a good thing for them to know. How, going back to quinceañera, in the Jewish religion, Jewish culture, you have bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. It's about the same. It's the end point is the same. It's a coming out. It's an accepting of adulthood, passing from childhood to adulthood. Confirmation in the Catholic Church, that's at 14, 15, same age group. So there are things that you can reach out to and bring them in. I always said, and I will continue to say, that as language teachers, we get away with a whole lot more than other teachers because we can talk about religion without expounding on a religion, but to make those comparisons. And if you have Hindus in your class, or if you have Buddhists in your class, maybe they have something similar. And it's good to talk about that. Compare meal times. I mean, that's always the culture shock, right? I'm going to Spain this summer, so I'm already training my stomach that lunch is my big meal and dinner is somewhat later and also lighter than what we would eat here. Breakfast is at 10:30 in the morning, usually, even though work starts maybe at 8 o'clock, but that's a cup of coffee and you go, and then you stop at 10 or 10:30 for your breakfast break. That's a good way to talk about meal times across the globe and see what time people eat different meals. That's a great connector. Next, please. And it's food, and kids love food. So intermediate, compare and contrast the relationship between cultural perspectives and expressive products. And I've given you some examples: music, visual arts, literature. They can analyze selected products from the target languages and their own. They can take a poem. If you teach AP Lit, for example, Spanish or French or whatever language, the kids have already learned the words that go along with analyzing a poem, a story, a novel. They know those words in English. Take them, put up charts in your room, have them look up the word in whatever the target language is, and then describe it. Give examples. As you're reading a poem or a story, use those elements so that it becomes ingrained. And then they'll be able to use them on the AP test. That's a big plus. Learners compare and contrast the role and importance of family. For us, family is everything. Multi-generational homes, for heaven's sake. We have them. I have nieces whose mothers live with them, uncles, and then they have their children and sometimes even grandchildren. So for us, that's commonplace. For American students, that's not commonplace at all. So that's a good way of teaching about the role and importance of families. In the Asian countries, elders are revered. In Native American cultures, elders are revered. I'm not sure how revered elders are in our culture here in the US. I think they are amongst different cultures, but not that are here in the US. But I'm not sure that that's part of the American culture. Learners compare and contrast entertainment and leisure options. Oh, in the Arabic. Oh, good. That's good to know. Of course, yes. But here's a connection. Spain was part of the Arabic Empire from 711 to 1492. That's a long time. And some of those things filtered down into the Spanish culture. So that's a crossover. And that's a wonderful crossover. A lot of our food, my gosh, a lot of our food has Arabic influences, the saffron, the pomegranate, are, all of those things, almonds, the list goes on and on. Words, algebra, ajedrez, so many words come from Arabic. Why? 800 years, folks, 800 years of coexistence. So we need to talk about that and have them realize that it was 800 years. Yeah, were there wars? Of course there were, the reconquest and all that. But 800 years is a long time to coexist. Okay. Next, please. Advanced range. Okay. Compare and contrast the value placed on work and leisure time. Do you work to live or do you live to work? That's a good start, a conversation starter. Do you eat to live or do you live to eat? For me, that's probably a little of both, but but it opens a window into what they think, what they've been exposed to, and what we want them to learn. So use those things in your classes. Learners compare and contrast behaviors related to health and wellness. What idea do we have in the U.S., in the American culture, about health and wellness? Have we gotten away from, for those of you who are a little older, not older than me, because I'm sure I'm the oldest one here, but Twiggy was very popular and her body type was very popular, and she looked like a twig. So I mean, that's maybe the ideal look. What about bulimia and anorexia? What role do those two illnesses play in body image? What is the body image of another culture? Do you have to be skinny as a reed or not? Body hair, beards on men or not? Shaggy hair. There's so many things that we can compare and contrast. These are the things that make language learning important and make language learning interesting for the kids. If you can hook them with culture, you've hooked them, because they'll want to learn more. So bring it in every chance you get. Bring in culture every chance you get. Compare and contrast behaviors relate. Oh, I said that. Attitudes towards youth and aging. We have a tendency well, I have a tendency to say that my family is multi-generational and they live in one home. And that works for them because they have grandparents who can take care of the children or the grandchildren. We don't necessarily have multi-generational homes, although now, with as much as housing is costing in the US, how many students go back to live with mom and dad after they get their college degree and the first years of working because they can't afford a house? So it's coming back full circle, and we'll see where it goes. Next, please. What strategies can you use to maximize? Okay, point out words that are similar from Greek and Latin and Arabic and other languages. And this doesn't have to be a special lesson. If you are teaching something and you see a word that has a Latin root, a Greek root, or an Arabic root, or some other root, then by all means, make the students aware of that. The more connections we give them, the better off they are. And they may not even internalize it right away, but I was always surprised when a student would come in and say, "Hey, Ms. V, you know what? I took this test in whatever, science, let's say, and I knew what a word was because I knew that such and such was also in Spanish. And I knew that you had said that it was a Greek root or a Latin root or whatever." And I mean, how good does that make you feel? It sure made me feel good every time they come in and say something like that. Discuss cognates and false friends. Very, very important. Point out regional and national sound patterns, Castilian Spanish versus Caribbean and Cono Sur Spanish. We all understand each other pretty much, but we do sound different. I have a Castilian accent because my family is all from Spain, and it was my first language. So that's the language that's the speech pattern that I have. But that doesn't mean I don't understand a Puerto Rican or a Cuban or an Argentino. And I think that's important because we have speech differences here in the US. Southerners have a twang. Northerners sound like they're talking through their nose. So you can draw comparisons with that. And if they haven't been fortunate enough to hear, I mean, I'm in the South, so that's easy. And Florida is a state where many people come from different places. So we have a variety of accents. But if you are not that fortunate, at least point it out. And maybe you can find a sound bite from someone from New York or from Boston and just play it so that they hear it. Sometimes kids don't even realize, because they understand it, so they don't notice it. I was born in New Jersey, but I moved to California when I was 11, so I don't have a New Jersey accent in English. But I know that when I first moved to California, I didn't say water, I said water, because that's what I heard. And it took a little time to break that habit, but so it happens, and kids move from place to place. So it's another layer of understanding. Point out vocabulary and cultural differences between and within the target language and the student's native language. Sentence patterns, word order, how they form adjectives, how they form adverbs. It's a lot of that. I know we're running out of time, and I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Let's go on so we can see some examples. Okay, so we're going to have some examples from Reporteros 1, 2, and 3. 4 is not out yet, but there is a sample unit that you can request. We're going to have samples from Spanish 1 with Reporteros 1 and from Mapas, because that would be I would highly recommend Mapas for AP or for Cambridge or for IB. It's more geared to that. Yes, let's see. Okay, so from Reporteros 1, and this is either novice or intermediate, depending on where your students are. If they've taken Spanish in middle school, then and they didn't get credit for it, then they are probably a little higher than your normal Spanish 1 student. So here we have an example of a page that has a cultura box at the bottom. And I want to point out that Reporteros 1, 2, 3, and soon to be 4, everything is there for you. Do you have to do every activity? No, but pick and choose and multi-use the same activity. But it always has, the thing I want to point out to you is that it has a culture box on many pages, and it tells you what you can do and how you can use it. In this one, it talks about the metric system and the connections with math. So if you can tell them there are whatever, I can't even think, 39 inches in a meter. What can they associate that with? Well, the yard has 36 inches. So that's a connection they can make. Have a yardstick, and if you can find one, a meter stick, that's awesome. On the next page, you see the conexión is with arte, and it's alebrijas. If they don't know what that is, it's okay. You can grab onto that. And what a project that is. Can you imagine what a beautiful project that is to incorporate in an art class, to go see the art teacher and say, can you somehow use this in your class? And maybe she doesn't want to use it with the whole, or he doesn't want to use it with the whole class, but there might be students who are interested in doing a project for art that can also be a project for Spanish. Are they double dipping? Maybe, but are they learning something in art that they can then connect to Spanish? Heck yeah. And that's the goal. The next one, please. Okay, then we have conexiones about art and history and art. So again, the architectural styles, why are houses built the way they are? Why are some houses built of stone? Why are some with bricks? Why do we use wood primarily in certain parts of the United States, which are sturdier? I mean, there's so much you can do, just so much you can do with this. So that's architecture. That's not a high school class, but certainly there are, the high school that's right here down the road from me has a building um, track. So, students, they don't have to have 2 years of foreign language to graduate or a world language to graduate, but many do take a second language. And that's something that you can, hold on to if they're going into that building track or architecture track. So that's something to think about. This one is every unit is divided into 2 lessons in reporteros, and every lesson has a cultural a page where they're going to make cultural comparisons about a topic that was discussed in that chapter, in that lesson. At the end of the unit, there is a prep for a presentation, a project, which you can use, you can modify, you can use it as is, you can modify it, whatever, but there is always a cultural component because it targets the actual standard. So you want to have something from each aspect. So here, excuse me, they're going to write and then they're going to speak. And what are they going to write about? They're going to choose one of the themes, one of the topics. They're going to fill in a chart comparing Mexico and their country, whatever country that is. If they are American, they can compare America. If they want to go above and beyond, they can compare Mexico to another Spanish-speaking country. If they're studying French, well, there's a number of French-speaking countries, and they can do that as well. Whatever gets their attention and holds it, that's what you want to key in on. And then they're going to talk. Their second part is talking, and they are going to choose a topic. They're going to fill in the chart, and it's about the customs and traditions of a family and a Chicana family. And if I know all of us know what that is, but you might have to explain it to your students and your community. We don't have any Chicanos really here in St. Augustine. We have some Mexicans, but they aren't Chicanos. So that would be a very interesting comparison for them because they may not know what a Chicano is. And then that's a whole nother aspect of language. Next, please. And then this is adverbs. So that's your linguistic comparison. How are adverbs formed in English? Mostly, not always, but a lot of them end in ly. Well, what is the ly component in Spanish, for example? It's mente. So you can make that connection for them. Now, there are adverbs of time that are one word, like siempre, casi siempre, and those are in English as they're different, but you have to compare, and that is very important. Grammar. They don't think about conjugations in English because that's the language they are surrounded by, but it's very important for them to know that that they are conjugated in English without realizing it because that's how they grew up. They grew up speaking it. But we do have endings in Spanish. We do have endings in English as well. And that's good to point out to them, make that comparison for them and make that connection for them. Next, please. And then mapas. Mapas, like I said, is a higher level, a bit higher level. And we're taking examples from Mapas Cuatro, since we don't have Reporteros Cuatro to show you. So this is about 4 scientific advancements for a better world. And they're going to talk about this, and they're going to make a cultural map. Reporteros 1, 2, and 3. And the other languages you'll see in a minute. There's a slide about that. So hold on, Betsy. They're going to talk about these 4 advances, and that's going to make a connection because it's talking about the world. So they're going to come out of their little cocoon, that is wherever they live, and they're going to talk about the rest of the world and make some connections that way. And then the last slide, no, next to the last slide, is they're going to choose a topic, and then they're going to fill out the concept map. Graphic organizers are wonderful things. And you have to maybe guide them at first, but they will know which ones are useful for them, and they will make them themselves. I've seen kids do that. They hold on to something, and that's a great thing because they can carry that over to other subjects. So you've really crossed the boundaries. This one has to do with influencers. And that's something new. That's something that a lot of kids know about. That's a connection they can make. They can make a comparison because they can talk about, maybe are influencers the same in a Hispanic country as they are in the United States? Do they do the same things? That will help them make a connection and a comparison as well. When they compare, they can make a connection. And next, please. And then this is making recommendations and comments with the subjunctive. It's higher level. And they're going to write an article or a news item and use that. So they're going to use, that's the linguistic comparison, which is always the harder, I think, because they're not as interested in the linguistic comparisons as they are in the cultural comparisons. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Oh, these are the resources in French, German, and Italian.
I have 3 questions in here.
Okay.
Okay, the first question is actually pretty easy, and is that many people were really curious about the book you mentioned, the one you used for the first parts of the webinar, which is the ACFIL Standards book. If you could tell us the full name.
Yes, it's World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. And I know if I hold it up, you can't see it. But that's what it's called. It's gosh, it's the 4th edition. And I may have read that there's a new edition, but I'm not sure that I read that. But the title again is World Readiness here. Oh, can I write it? Can I write it somewhere?
Absolutely. Yes, if you can write it. I just wrote it down, but if you can just
Okay,
double check that
that's
for
great.
me,
Yes,
because I
because I
might
don't
have
think
done
I
it
can.
wrong.
Yes, it's World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. It's an awesome book. It is, I mean, it's really gives you examples for every one of the standards, all 9. So that's great.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's in the 4th edition, and it may be a 5th one may be coming out. I think I read something about that.
Perfect. Yes, there is a link also for the book in case anyone wants to take a look at it. Then another question we have is, so all of this writing, for example, in English, for example, this teacher, their beginners don't have the vocabulary or the grammar. So how can they do it? Do UNI's assessments also reflect the connections? How can they do with all the writing when they're just in a beginner stage?
Well, they're all graduated, so you're not going to ask them to do more than they are capable of doing. The unit at the end is just a recap of what they've learned in that unit. So they should be able to handle it. If they put in any effort at all, then they should be able to handle it without too much problem. Later on, they can, there's some things that you can do later on because you always have that student who wants to do more but can't. But there's nothing wrong with them, not always by any means, but I'm trying to think of how to say this without offending anyone. How many times are you in a conversation in Spanish, French, German, whatever, and you stick in an English word because you don't know the word in English, in Spanish, French, German, or whatever? We do that all the time. There's nothing wrong with a student doing that as well. If he doesn't know the word, that's fine. When he says it in English, you can give it to him in Spanish, and then hopefully he'll write it down and remember it. And what's that? I think when I was in school, and I'm in my 70s, I'm 74. So when I went to school, I was told that in order to learn a vocabulary word, you had to use it 5 times or 10 times. I can't remember. And then that word became yours. It was stored somewhere in your brain. So That's why we recycle vocabulary so much. Keep recycling the vocabulary. If you're doing an art presentation, if you're doing an art comparison, give them, 5 words, let's say, that deal with that topic. And then you can use them again in the next one, the next topic that you're going to do, and add 1 or 2 other words. So they'll get a word, a bank. And that's what I would do. I also have them keep a vocabulary notebook where for items such as these that they could add, like if you were talking about art, then they can write a list of vocabulary. And when they're writing about it, they can use their list, that vocabulary that was generated in class.
Perfect. Great. And on that same line, someone asks, just to double check that, do you teach only in the target language or do you mix it?
I've been retired for 12 years. So I'm going to go back in time and I will say that I used as much Spanish as I could, depending on the level. If I can explain something, grammar especially, if I can explain it in 5 minutes in English, then I'm going to do that so that we have 50 minutes to practice instead of spending 2 class periods trying to explain and get the point across in Spanish and them not have any understanding of it. What have I gained? I've gained nothing, but I've lost 2 class periods. So explain it in whatever language is easier for you and for them, and then run with it. I'm not a stickler for, using target language exclusively. Yeah, that's the way kids learn. But remember that our students in middle school or high school already have set patterns in their minds. So they need to, at some point you will reach where you're going 90% of the time in the target language, but certainly not at the beginning. I don't think, my opinion.
Of course. And for the next question, which, unless someone else doesn't have another one, of course, would be the last. This is something that we can also maybe reply through the marketing email, but do the UNIS assessments also reflect connections and cultural comparisons using the language?
Some of them do. And if they don't, you can have them do that. It depends on what the unit has covered. It's like if the topic of the lesson, like family, for example, then certainly there's a cultural and there's a cultural comparison and connection. But if it's a topic that maybe doesn't lend itself to it, you can bring that in as part of your assessment. That would be awesome. These are all guidelines, it's like they're all guidelines.
Absolutely. So far, this was our last question. So again, Linda, thank you very much for
My
another
pleasure.
great webinar. So that being said, I hope you all have an amazing rest of the weekend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Adios, chicos.
Ciao.